Hey guys, Johnny Old School here, and where do you come from? Now, I'm not asking what country do you come from, or whether or not you came from an act of sordid sexual congress between your parents. I mean, where do you come from? The thing that is you, where does that come from? I think to myself sometimes how strange the idea of individual personalities really is. Because you can have two kids who are grown up in the exact same house and have the same parents and go to the same school and even share a lot of the same friends, and they can have very, very different personalities from each other. So I think to myself, growing up with three younger brothers and living in the same house and even sharing the same room at a point, where did I come from? Because it can't simply just be my experiences that have shaped my personality, because if that were true, then the people I grew up with would be essentially identical to me. We'd all be sharing so many of the same experiences, we'd almost be the same person, if experiences were what created our personality. Now, I don't have kids, and God willing, I never will, but I have a couple of friends who do. And I always find it very interesting to hear them talk about their children, especially if they're very young. They'll describe aspects of a tiny person's personality that me not being a parent, me not growing up around, you know, like a new human being in development would know. See, me, I could look at a baby in a crib and just be like, yeah, it's just a baby, it's all babies are all generic and the same. But the parent can tell me something like, hey, you know, it's really interesting, when I play this certain kind of music, he gets really active, he really seems to enjoy it. But my other kid doesn't respond to it at all. How much of our personality is actually there before we're grown and developed and are able to express those parts of our personality in more visible ways? Now, you could say that personality is the result of genetics. You could almost look at the human body as sort of like a focal lens for consciousness, and depending on how that lens is formed and what sort of imperfections or impurities are in that lens, the consciousness will come through and be focused into various different personality traits. Or perhaps you think that our genetic structure and the way that our bodies, you know, grow and are formed is essentially what creates consciousness. That the structure of neurons in our brain is what creates our consciousness. That essentially our personality is determined by our genetics. But I don't think our personality is exclusively controlled by our genetics, because sometimes people change their personality. I myself can think of all sorts of characteristics that were, let's say, maybe negative, insecurities, fears, things like that, that through my growth process I've overcome, and they no longer affect me anymore like they once used to. Now, I guess to answer the question, where did I come from, I could think to myself, well, where was I before? Now, there's really only two possible answers to that question. I was either nowhere or I was somewhere. The popular answer is that we were nowhere before we were born, mainly because that's kind of the easiest one to understand. It sounds the most rational. But here's a little interesting thought experiment for those of you who believe that we were probably nowhere before we were born. When you're lying in bed at night and you're about to fall asleep and you finally go unconscious, do you remember that point of going unconscious? And when you finally wake up in the morning, do you remember having been asleep that entire time? I'm not talking about dreaming. I'm just saying one of those dreamless nights. Do you remember where you were and what you were doing during all those hours of unconsciousness? No, you just sort of wake up and you're just kind of back. Now, what if that's how life and death works? And what if whatever our spirit or soul or consciousness is doing in between, we simply just don't remember? Kind of like how sometimes you can wake up from having a dream that was vivid and bright, and then it slowly fades as you kind of open your eyes, and you can remember to yourself like, wow, I just had the most fucked up dream, but I can't really remember it. Another way that I can go about trying to answer for myself where I came from is instead of asking where I was before, I could ask myself, where am I right now? Because technically speaking, I'm in the same place I've always been. I'm living in this exact moment that's constantly happening all the time. I'm not moving towards something or away from something, I'm just existing in a moment and changing shape. So if there is no past and there is no future, there's just this one moment, that means along the sort of dimension of that moment, there's a point where my body didn't exist yet, and another point where my body no longer exists. So if I'm living in a dimension where there are points where my body no longer exists, that are occurring in this moment, where is my consciousness coming from right now? Where is me right now? What if me is coming from somewhere outside of that sort of moment dimension? And what if that me is sort of injecting itself into this kind of various points within that moment where I have a body that is? Now, the question, where am I right now, is a really interesting one in terms of dreaming. Because where I am right now, I can look around me, I know my geographical location, I know my location in the city, I'm inside my apartment, my perceptions are inside my body. But when I go to sleep at night, I'm somewhere very different. I've been to places that are not Canada. We all have. We've all had various bizarre and interesting dreams. But dreaming kind of proves that you can be somewhere without your body. You can have an experience where you can touch and hear and see things and interact with people, but your physical body is completely shut down. If someone were to poke you during a very deep dream cycle, or to say like, hey, wake up, you would just be completely conked out. Essentially, you're somewhere else. Now, there's a lot of interesting theories for dreams. It's sort of something that we haven't quite figured out yet collectively. And the best explanation is that a dream is just sort of an imagination that gets very realistic when you're unconscious. And I think that's probably an explanation for some dreams, but there's stories from people all over the globe who have had a dream and then had something from the dream actually happen. Now, that would seem to indicate that when your body is shut down, maybe your consciousness can go somewhere and experience a moment in time that is a few kind of steps ahead. You can have that experience, then come back, and then you have that knowledge, and then thing eventually happens, and you're like, holy shit, I saw that in my dream. Because it wouldn't make sense to me that your imagination is so good that you could imagine a future event of a plane crashing or a specific family member dying in a certain way. But it might make more sense that when you were asleep, your consciousness kind of skipped ahead a little bit and learned something, and then skipped back home, like a little cosmic bunny rabbit out for a stroll in the galactic forest. What if some dreams you're actually experiencing something that's real? Now, I'm not talking about the ones where, you know, giant monsters destroying the city and chasing you and your friends, but I mean just kind of the weird ones where like, yeah, I was in this like the weird factory and there's like this big fat guy in a yellow hat there and they're making television sets that only play one channel. What if in some alternate reality that actually exists? What if in a parallel dimension that factory was real? And what if for whatever reason your consciousness just either found out how to go there or decided to take a little visit there, and you've seen, experienced things, and then you wake up and you remember having gone there? And what if it's hard to remember dreams like that because we're not really supposed to? Maybe that would interrupt our intended functionality on this planet. And maybe the reason that we can't remember if we were anywhere before we were born is because life is sort of the ultimate dream. After all, when you're in the middle of a dream, you don't usually realize that you're dreaming. You don't think about the fact that you have to work in the morning, or that you had an interesting conversation with your mother the other night on the phone. Your identity within this world often completely fades away when you're in a dream world. And oftentimes vice versa. When you wake up from that dream, it's oftentimes very hard to remember it as your identity sinks back in. And what if life and death happen on much the same functionality? We kind of wake up in this body and we can't really remember if anything happened before. And then maybe we die and lose that body and suddenly it all comes back to us because we're in that new environment where we have that identity formed by that environment. See, I would then ask myself, well, what would be the function of forgetting? Why would you want to forget? Why would you choose to have an experience where you couldn't remember something before? You couldn't remember if you were somewhere before you were born into your body. Well, I suppose that would be kind of the difference of having a dream where you know you're dreaming and you remember everything about your life versus an experience where you thought everything was 100% real. If you go to sleep and you think to yourself, I'm gonna have a dream about seeing a dinosaur on a beach tonight, and then you go to sleep and all of a sudden you see a dinosaur on the beach, you'll be like, yep, I'm having a dream where I see a dinosaur on a beach. Compare that to the experience of just going to sleep and all of a sudden you're conscious and you're on a beach and there's a fucking dinosaur. You'd be like, holy shit, there's a fucking dinosaur on this beach. Your emotions would get stirred up. Maybe it would chase you. Maybe it would be awesome. Maybe you'd ride it. It's a very different experience. It would be a very different experience depending on what you are taking with you into that kind of new realm of consciousness. If you were bringing with your old identity, then your experience would be shaped by the things that you brought with you. So if you had the opportunity to go into a world and have an experience that was completely new, you would learn fantastic new things. You would have experiences that you couldn't have otherwise. You would grow in ways that normally you would never have the opportunity to grow. But since you already had a personality beforehand that was shaped by whatever world you used to be in, when you come here and you forget, you're still bringing something with you. You start fresh and new as a little baby, slate wiped clean, but the essence of you, the essence of what makes up you, is still there, shaped by the experiences before it came there. And maybe that's what our personality is. Maybe that's why one baby will dance to a certain kind of music in a crib and another baby won't. Maybe that's why a person will be naturally more competitive and enjoy sporting events, and another person will, you know, be 6 years old and be like, Mom, I don't want to play soccer, I want to read books instead. Now, if you look at life in terms of it being a choice to come here and have an experience, it essentially means that you can't really do anything wrong. And I don't mean that you can't treat people wrong, but I mean that anything you do or you feel like a failure, or you think to yourself like, oh, that just didn't work, it kind of did. Because if the reason you're here is to have an experience in a body, then everything you do is have an experience in a body. That's kind of a neat thought. You know, it's always been very interesting for me to just meet new people. Just simply meeting new people. Because I've noticed that age doesn't really necessarily determine that person's personality. I can think of people who are in their 50s and 60s and handle certain situations in what I would consider a very immature fashion. And I can think of people who are 19 or 20 years old who conduct themselves with a sort of understanding and mastery in life that I see old people unable to reach. What if that's because it's something they've learnt over time? That's something they brought with them. What if when you see a 45-year-old woman throwing a temper tantrum about chicken McNuggets in a McDonald's, what if that's a brand new soul? And what if when you see an 18-year-old kid handle a breakup with his girlfriend in a very respectable, mature fashion, what if that's because he's already learned how to do that? Some part of him already knows how to do that. That's kind of where the term old soul comes from. Someone who's just kind of been through the cycle enough times to just kind of get how it's supposed to be done. I could go a lot deeper into this topic, but I think I'll leave it there for now and save that for future installments. Anyways, I'm Johnny Oldschool for Third Voice, and I hope you enjoyed that. Take care, fuckos. If you liked this video, please leave me an angry comment describing how every single one of my theories are batshit insane. And of course, share it around and subscribe to the channel. Listen, I get it, I'm a giant whore. Building YouTube channels is hard, alright?